My name is Audrey, and at 35 years old, I thought my career at TechVault Solutions was secure. For 7 years, I built their security infrastructure from scratch, pouring my expertise into every line of code. Then Bradley arrived as my new boss, immediately dismissing my contributions. What he never bothered to learn was that I personally implemented the master license our entire company depended on. When he smirked and demanded my badge, laptop, and dignity, I simply walked away. Before I dive into this story, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you have ever been underestimated at work. I started my journey in cybersecurity almost by accident. During college, I discovered I had a knack for understanding complex systems and spotting vulnerabilities that others missed. What began as a hobby in my dorm room eventually turned into a computer science degree with a specialization in network security. After graduation, I bounced between a few entry-level positions, gathering experience and building my reputation in the industry. When I joined TechVault Solutions, it was still a scrappy startup with big dreams. There were only 20 employees working out of a converted warehouse space with exposed brick walls and not enough parking spaces. Harold, the founder and original CEO, interviewed me personally. Unlike many executives I had met, Harold actually understood the technical side of the business. He asked challenging questions about encryption protocols and penetration testing methodologies that showed he valued substance over buzzwords. "We need someone who can build our security from the ground up," Harold had told me, leaning forward in his chair with genuine enthusiasm. "Someone who thinks like both a defender and an attacker." I still remember how it felt to be truly seen for my skills, rather than just checked off as a diversity hire, which had happened at previous companies. Harold offered me the job on the spot, and I accepted without hesitation. In those early days, we all wore multiple hats. My official title was Senior Systems Administrator, but in reality, I handled everything from setting up the internal networks to developing security protocols for our client data storage. The hours were long, the pay was decent, but not spectacular, but the work was genuinely fulfilling. I had a voice in important decisions, and the freedom to implement solutions I believed in. As the company grew from 20 to 50 then to over 100 employees, my role evolved. I built a small team of talented security specialists, handpicking each member based on both technical ability and collaborative mindset. Together, we created a robust security infrastructure that became one of our selling points to clients. The turning point came 3 years ago when I identified a critical vulnerability in our authentication system. After researching various solutions, I discovered AuthGuard Solutions, a boutique security firm with an innovative approach to enterprise-level authentication. Their system was elegant, scalable, and offered the kind of protection our growing company needed. I personally led the negotiations with AuthGuard, spending weeks in detailed discussions about implementation strategies and license terms. The final agreement named me as the primary administrator for the license, a standard practice that ensured continuity of service and clear lines of responsibility. What this meant, though few people at TechVault fully understood, was that the entire company's digital security framework ultimately ran through authentication protocols that I controlled. As we implemented the AuthGuard system, I documented everything: meticulously system architecture administration, protocols verification schedules. I submitted comprehensive reports to Harold and the executive team explaining in both technical and layperson's terms how the system worked and what maintenance it required. Harold read every document and asked thoughtful questions. He understood the importance of what we had built. For 4 years, TechVault Solutions grew steadily. We moved to a sleek office downtown, acquired smaller competitors, and built a reputation as a reliable provider of secure data solutions. My team expanded to 15 people, all experts in their respective security niches. I was proud of what we had accomplished. Then came the announcement that changed everything. During an all-hands meeting last spring, Harold revealed that TechVault had been acquired by Nexus Technologies, a much larger corporation with offices across the country. "This is an exciting opportunity for all of us," Harold assured us, standing on a small stage in our main conference room. "Nexus has the resources and reach to take what we've built to the next level. Everyone's position is secure. I made sure of that in the negotiations." The room buzzed with a mixture of excitement and anxiety. Change always brings uncertainty, but the promised opportunities for advancement and growth within a larger organization sounded promising. Harold walked through the transition plan, explaining that while he would stay on as a consultant, new management would be coming in to integrate us into the Nexus corporate structure. I remember feeling cautiously optimistic. My team had built something valuable, something the acquiring company surely recognized as an asset. Perhaps this would mean more resources, larger projects, and new challenges. At 35, I was hitting my professional stride, ready to take on more responsibility and continue growing. The initial transition meetings seemed to confirm this optimism. The Nexus executives spoke glowingly about TechVault's industry-leading security protocols and impressive technical talent. They outlined plans for expansion and integration that would leverage our expertise across their entire organization. During one of these early meetings, I gave a presentation on our security infrastructure, explaining how the AuthGuard system formed the backbone of our protection strategy. The Nexus CTO nodded approvingly, asking several informed questions about scalability and compliance features. "We definitely want to explore implementing this across all our divisions," he said, making notes on his tablet. "Your team has done impressive work here." Walking out of that meeting, I felt a surge of professional pride. This acquisition could be the opportunity I had been working toward, my chance to lead security initiatives at an enterprise level. I updated my team with enthusiasm, sharing the vision of how our work would be elevated and expanded in the coming months. If only I had recognized the warning signs that were already appearing, the way certain decisions were being made without consulting the people who would implement them, the subtle shift in communication patterns, the gradual replacement of TechVault leaders with Nexus veterans. But in those early days, hope still outweighed caution. I believed in what we had built, and assumed that its value would be self-evident to the new leadership. That was my first mistake. The first time I met Bradley Pierce, my new direct supervisor from Nexus, he was 40 minutes late to our scheduled meeting. I sat in the glass-walled conference room watching the minutes tick by on my laptop, wondering if I had somehow misunderstood the time or location. When he finally arrived, he offered no apology for his tardiness. Instead, he immediately launched into questions about department budgets and staffing levels, barely making eye contact as he scrolled through something on his phone. "I am Bradley Pierce, head of infrastructure and security for all Nexus divisions," he introduced himself, finally looking up. "I will be overseeing the integration of your team into our standard operating procedures." There was something in his tone that instantly put me on edge, a dismissiveness that suggested he had already formed opinions about TechVault and its people. "I am looking forward to sharing our security architecture with you," I replied, opening my presentation. "We have some unique solutions that have proven extremely effective." He nodded distractedly. "I am sure you do, but Nexus has established security protocols across all our divisions. Standardization is key to our operation." That first meeting set the tone for what was to come. I walked him through our systems, explaining the custom solutions we had developed and the robust protection they provided. I detailed the AuthGuard implementation and how it had prevented several sophisticated attack attempts over the past year. Bradley listened with thinly veiled impatience, interrupting frequently to compare our approaches unfavorably to Nexus standards. When I mentioned that our security breach metrics were industry-leading, he simply shrugged. "That is all well and good for a company your size, but enterprise-scale security requires different approaches." The condescension in his voice was unmistakable. He was treating TechVault like a quaint mom-and-pop operation, rather than the sophisticated mid-sized tech firm it had become. The following week, Bradley called the first team meeting under his leadership. I arrived early, as did most of my team members, a habit Harold had always appreciated. Bradley arrived 10 minutes late again, this time accompanied by 2 colleagues from Nexus, that he introduced as Jacob and Nathaniel, senior security architects, who would be helping with the transition. Throughout the meeting, a pattern quickly emerged. Whenever I or any original TechVault employee offered input or suggestions, Bradley would acknowledge it politely, but non-committally. But when Jacob or Nathaniel spoke, Bradley would lean forward with interest, praising their insights and writing down their suggestions. When I raised concerns about potential compatibility issues between our authentication system and some of the Nexus platforms, Bradley cut me off. "Let us not get bogged down in hypothetical problems," he said dismissively. "Jacob, what do you think about implementation timelines?" It was as if my 7 years of experience with our systems counted for nothing compared to the opinions of people who had never even seen our codebase. After the meeting, I approached Bradley to discuss my concerns more directly. "I think there are some critical security considerations we need to address before moving forward with integration," I said. He glanced at his watch. "Send me an email with the details. I will look it over when I can." That email, like many that followed, received no response. The situation came to a head 3 weeks later, when our system detected an unusual pattern of authentication attempts that signaled a potential breach attempt. I immediately implemented our security protocols, isolating the affected systems and tracing the source of the intrusion. Working through the night with 2 of my team members, Iris and Justin, we identified the vulnerability, a misconfigured API endpoint that had been recently modified as part of the Nexus integration. We patched the vulnerability, secured the systems, and documented the entire incident in detail. The next morning, exhausted, but relieved that we had prevented any data exposure, I sent a comprehensive report to Bradley and the security team. 2 hours later, I received a meeting invitation for an executive briefing on the security incident. When I arrived at the meeting, I was surprised to find Bradley already presenting to the room of Nexus executives. Fortunately, our standard security protocols detected the anomaly he was saying, standing at the front of the room with my slides displayed behind him. The team implemented the containment procedures we established during the transition. I stood in the doorway, momentarily stunned. He was presenting my team's work, as if it had been directed by him, using the very slides I had prepared, but with the TechVault logo replaced by the Nexus brand. When he noticed me, Bradley barely paused. "Ah, Audrey, good of you to join us. I was just bringing everyone up to speed on how we handled the situation." Throughout the meeting, Bradley positioned himself as the decisive leader who had guided the response, occasionally acknowledging the team's execution of our security protocols. Not once did he mention that the vulnerability had been introduced by the very integration his team had insisted on, nor that the detection and resolution had relied entirely on systems my team had built long before Nexus arrived. After the meeting, confusion and hurt swirled through me as I tried to make sense of what had happened. Was this just corporate politics? Was I being oversensitive? I had never experienced this kind of treatment under Harold's leadership. I decided to give Bradley the benefit of the doubt. Perhaps he was under pressure from his superiors and needed some early wins. Maybe once he better understood our systems and my expertise, things would improve. I scheduled a one-on-one meeting to discuss my role in the new organization and share some ideas for strengthening our security posture further. The meeting was canceled an hour before it was scheduled to begin. The automated notification offered no explanation or rescheduling option. I tried again the following week. Canceled. And the week after that. Canceled. Meanwhile, I began noticing that I was no longer being included in strategic planning meetings about our systems. Decisions were being made without input from the people who had built and maintained the infrastructure for years. When I raised concerns in emails, they went unanswered or received cursory responses promising to take it under advisement. During this time, I confided in Iris, a senior security analyst who had been with TechVault almost as long as I had. We often stayed late catching up after the Nexus transplants had left for the day. "It is not just you," Iris confirmed, her voice low despite the empty office. "They are sidelining all the original TechVault leaders. Did you hear about Megan in product development? They reassigned her entire team to report to some new guy from Nexus headquarters." "But why?" I asked, genuinely baffled. "We built something valuable here. Our security metrics are excellent. Our clients are happy. Why fix what is not broken?" Iris shrugged, a resigned expression on her face. "Corporate acquisitions are rarely about preserving what works. They are about imposing control. Bradley does not want collaborators. He wants executors of his vision." Her words stayed with me, a disquieting truth I was reluctant to accept. I had invested too much of myself in TechVault to believe that my contributions could be so easily dismissed. But as the weeks passed, the evidence became harder to ignore. My role was being systematically diminished. My expertise overlooked my team, gradually realigned to report through Bradley's hierarchy rather than to me. The company I had helped build was changing around me, and not for the better, and there seemed to be nothing I could do to stop it. 6 weeks into the transition, Bradley called me into his office. For once he seemed almost friendly, leaning back in his chair with a relaxed smile that immediately put me on guard. "Audrey, I would like you to meet Ethan," he said, gesturing to a young man I had not noticed sitting in the corner of the office. "Ethan is joining us from Nexus headquarters. He has extensive experience in security architecture and will be conducting a comprehensive review of our current systems." Ethan looked barely out of college with a confident smile that did not reach his eyes. He extended his hand, his grip too firm, too eager to establish dominance. "Looking forward to digging into your work," he said. "Bradley tells me there are a lot of unconventional approaches that need standardization." The implication was clear. My years of careful, thoughtful system design were being characterized as irregular deviations from corporate standards rather than innovative solutions tailored to our specific needs. "I would be happy to walk you through our architecture," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "There are some nuanced aspects that might not be immediately obvious without context." Bradley's smile tightened slightly. "That is exactly why Ethan is here. You will give him full access to all systems and documentation. Consider this your top priority for the next few weeks." What followed was a bizarre form of professional torture. I spent days walking Ethan through systems I had designed and implemented, explaining decision points and security features that he clearly did not fully grasp. He took copious notes, frequently interrupting with questions that revealed his superficial understanding of enterprise security architecture. "Why did you use this encryption method instead of the industry standard?" he would ask, referencing approaches that had been outdated for years. "This was actually developed after several high-profile breaches proved the vulnerabilities in those standards," I would explain patiently. "We implemented it 2 years ago after extensive testing showed a 60% improvement in resistance to the latest attack vectors." Ethan would nod, making notes without acknowledging the validity of the approach. Later, I would discover him explaining his findings to Bradley, invariably framing my design decisions as problematic deviations that needed correction. More concerning was that, as I was occupied training Ethan, I was being excluded from planning meetings where the future of our security infrastructure was being decided. Occasionally, Iris or Justin would fill me in on decisions that had already been made, decisions that often displayed a fundamental misunderstanding of our current systems. "They want to replace the custom authentication layer with the standard Nexus solution," Justin told me one evening, looking troubled. When I tried to explain how it would create vulnerabilities in our client data protection, Jacob told me to stick to implementation and leave the architecture decisions to the experts. The situation reached a critical point when I discovered, almost by accident, that Bradley's team was planning to modify our AuthGuard implementation to fit the Nexus standard model. I found the project plan on a shared drive with a startling implementation date just 2 weeks away. After reviewing the technical specifications, I was horrified. The proposed changes would effectively bypass key security features of the AuthGuard system, creating potential vulnerabilities throughout our network. Worse, they showed no understanding of how the license verification system worked, a critical component that required specific protocols to maintain compliance. I immediately drafted a detailed email to Bradley, copying the entire security team and several executives. The message outlined the specific technical concerns, the potential compliance issues, and the security risks the proposed changes would introduce. I included detailed diagrams and references to our existing documentation, taking care to maintain a professional, solution-oriented tone despite my alarm. Given these significant concerns, I concluded I strongly recommend we pause this implementation until we can thoroughly address these issues. I am available to meet at your convenience to discuss alternative approaches that would achieve the desired integration without compromising our security posture. I sent the email on a Tuesday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, I had my response not in an email but in a public dressing down during the department meeting. "I need to address something," Bradley announced, his voice carrying across the conference room. "There seems to be some confusion about how decisions are made in this organization. While we welcome input from all team members, the final decisions on architecture and implementation rest with leadership." He looked directly at me, his expression stern. "Sending alarmist emails that question leadership decisions to a wide distribution list is not how we operate at Nexus. It undermines team cohesion and creates unnecessary concern. Any issues should be brought directly to your supervisor in private." The room fell uncomfortably silent. My face burned with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He had deliberately mischaracterized my legitimate technical concerns as emotional resistance to change, positioning me as a problematic employee rather than an experienced professional raising valid issues. "I apologize if the distribution was too broad," I said carefully, "but the technical concerns I raised are valid and time-sensitive. The proposed changes would introduce significant vulnerabilities in our system." Bradley's expression hardened. "The decisions have been reviewed by our security architects and approved by executive leadership. The implementation will proceed as scheduled." I expect everyone on this team to support these decisions professionally. The message was clear: fall in line or be seen as obstructive. As the meeting continued, I noticed several colleagues avoiding eye contact with me, already creating distance from someone who had been publicly identified as not being a team player. Over the next few weeks, I began hearing rumors about department restructuring. Snippets of conversation would stop when I entered rooms. Meetings about my areas of responsibility were scheduled when I had conflicts. I found myself increasingly isolated, my sphere of influence shrinking by the day. Then came the access changes. I discovered one morning that my administrative privileges had been reduced on several key systems I had personally designed and implemented. When I inquired about the change, the response from IT was vague, standardizing access controls across departments as part of the integration process. The anxiety that had been building for months intensified. My position, once secure and respected, now felt precarious. The systems I had built were being modified without my input, my expertise was being ignored, and my authority was being systematically undermined. Adding to my growing concern was a calendar notification I received about the Authguard license renewal, which was scheduled for the following month. Typically, this would trigger a review process and verification protocol that I would oversee, but no one had consulted me about it, and when I mentioned it to Ethan, he seemed completely unaware of the requirement. License renewals are handled by procurement now, he said dismissively. Just forward any information you have to them. But this was not just any license renewal. The Authguard system required biannual verification by the registered administrator me to maintain compliance and security integrity. It was not a simple matter of paying an invoice. It involved specific technical protocols that were tied to my credentials. I documented these requirements in an email to Bradley, Ethan, and the procurement team, attaching the relevant sections of our agreement with Authguard. Like so many of my communications, this one received no response. As the deadline approached, my unease grew. I was witnessing the dismantling of carefully constructed security systems by people who did not understand them, while being increasingly pushed to the margins of an organization I had helped build. Something would have to give. I just did not expect it would be my career. The meeting invitation appeared in my calendar on a Monday morning. The subject line was simply discussion, but the participants told the real story: Bradley, Pierce, and Stephanie from Human Resources. No agenda, no additional information, scheduled for 4:30 p.m. that same day. I stared at the notification on my screen, a cold weight settling in my stomach. After 15 years in corporate environments, I knew exactly what this meeting was. The timing late in the day, the HR presence, the vague description, all signaled one thing: termination. Despite having anticipated this possibility for weeks, seeing the actual invitation still felt like a physical blow. 7 years of dedication, of solved problems and averted crises, of late nights and early mornings, all reduced to a 30-minute slot at the end of a Monday. I closed my laptop and walked to the break room, needing a moment to collect myself. As I waited for the coffee machine to finish its cycle, I mentally reviewed my options. I could preemptively resign, denying them the satisfaction of firing me. I could contact Harold, who might still have enough influence to intervene. I could prepare a detailed defense of my contributions, complete with metrics and testimonials. But as I stirred my coffee, watching the dark liquid swirl, I realized none of those options appealed to me. This company was no longer the place I had helped build. The values of innovation, collaboration, and respect that had once defined our culture had been replaced by hierarchy, conformity, and politics. Perhaps it was time to let go. I returned to my desk and spent the day wrapping up documentation on projects, organizing my files, and quietly backing up personal items to my cloud storage. I responded to emails, participated in a team call, and behaved exactly as I would on any normal Monday. If anyone noticed my unusually thorough organization efforts, they did not comment. At 4:25 p.m., I closed my laptop, straightened my desk, and walked calmly to the conference room where my professional execution would take place. Bradley and Stephanie were already seated, identically somber expressions on their faces. A folder lay closed on the table in front of Stephanie. "Audrey, please have a seat," Stephanie said, gesturing to the chair across from them. Her voice had that carefully modulated HR tone, professional, yet distanced from the human impact of the conversation about to unfold. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and waited. There was no point in making this easier for them. Bradley cleared his throat. Audrey, after careful consideration and multiple performance discussions, we have decided that your role at TechVault is being eliminated effective immediately. I wanted to laugh at the blatant lie about multiple performance discussions but kept my expression neutral. I had received consistently excellent performance reviews throughout my tenure until Bradley arrived, and he had never once provided formal feedback of any kind. We appreciate your contributions to the company, he continued, not sounding appreciative in the slightest, but as we complete the integration with Nexus, we find that your approach is not aligned with our forward direction. Your reluctance to adapt to our standardized processes and resistance to the necessary changes has created obstacles to our transition objectives. Each accusation was a twisted version of reality. My reluctance to adapt had been legitimate concerns about flawed implementations. My resistance had been attempts to prevent security vulnerabilities. But in the corporate narrative being constructed, I was the problem, not the ill-conceived changes being forced through. Stephanie slid the folder toward me. This contains your severance agreement. We are offering 8 weeks of pay contingent upon signing a standard non-compete and non-disclosure agreement. Your benefits will continue through the end of the month. I glanced at the folder without opening it, and if I choose not to sign, a flicker of annoyance crossed Bradley's face. Then you would receive only the minimum required by law. I strongly recommend reviewing the offer, with the understanding that it is the best outcome available in this situation. The threat was thinly veiled: take what we are offering, or we will make things difficult for you. Your company account access has already been disabled, Stephanie added. We will need your badge laptop and any other company property before you leave the building today. Bradley leaned forward, a small, satisfied smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Badge, laptop, and dignity. On my desk. Now. The casual cruelty of his words hung in the air between us. He was enjoying this, I realized. Enjoying the power to dismiss someone who knew more than he did, who had built what he merely inherited. Is there anything else you would like to discuss about the termination? Stephanie asked, her pen poised over her notepad. I considered my options. I could fight this point out: the absence of documented performance issues, highlight the suspicious timing after I had raised legitimate security concerns. I could make accusations of my own demand to speak to higher-level executives or threaten legal action. But what would that accomplish? The decision had clearly been made long before this meeting. Fighting would only prolong a painful process and tie me to a company that no longer valued what I had to offer. More importantly, there was a critical piece of information. They did not have information that would become very relevant very soon. No, I said simply. I have nothing else to discuss. Stephanie looked slightly surprised by my calm acceptance. In that case, I will escort you to your desk to collect your personal belongings and then to the exit. The walk through the open office was designed to be humiliating, a public declaration of my changed status. Colleagues glanced up as we passed quickly, averting their eyes when they realized what was happening. Justin looked shocked. Iris half rose from her chair, concern evident on her face, but I gave a small shake of my head. There was nothing she could do. At my desk, I collected the few personal items I cared about: a framed photo, a special coffee mug, a small plant I had kept alive for years. Everything else could stay. I placed my laptop and badge on the desk, powered down the computer one last time, and stood ready to leave. Your security card, Stephanie prompted. I removed it from my wallet and placed it beside the laptop. Bradley had appeared at the edge of the department, watching the proceedings with poorly concealed satisfaction. As Stephanie led me toward the exit, we passed Bradley's office. He stood in the doorway, that same smirk on his face. I will need those items on my desk, he reminded me, pointing to the laptop and badge I had left behind. Without a word, I walked back to my desk, gathered the company property, and placed everything carefully on his desk. Our eyes met for a brief moment, his triumphant mind carefully blank. Then I turned and walked away through the security doors and into the afternoon sunshine, leaving behind the office where I had spent 7 years building something I had once been proud of. What I did not leave behind was the knowledge that in exactly 17 hours the Authguard license verification would attempt to run its automated protocol, and when it failed to authenticate through my credentials, the entire company would discover exactly how valuable my outdated and non-standard approach had been. The drive home passed in a blur of conflicting emotions: Shock gave way to anger, then to a strange sense of liberation, and finally to a hollow emptiness that settled in my chest as I pulled into my driveway. The house felt unusually quiet as I moved through the rooms, dropping my bag and kicking off my shoes with mechanical motions. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat at my kitchen table, staring at the severance folder I had brought home unopened. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floor, marking the passage of time as I sat motionless processing what had happened. 7 years. 7 years of my professional life invested in building something I believed in, working with people I respected, solving problems that challenged me. All of it ended in a 30-minute meeting with people who had never bothered to understand the value I brought to the company. My phone buzzed with a text message from Iris. "What happened? Are you okay? Call me." I set the phone aside, not ready to talk about it yet. Instead, I finally opened the severance folder, scanning the legal language with detached interest. 8 weeks of salary in exchange for signing away my right to pursue any claims against the company. A non-compete clause that would prevent me from working in my specialized field for 12 months. A confidentiality agreement that would bar me from discussing the circumstances of my departure. It was as these things go, a relatively standard corporate severance package, designed primarily to protect the company from potential litigation or competitive damage. What it did not account for was the technical reality of the Authguard system and my unique role in its administration. When we had implemented Authguard 3 years ago, I had followed standard enterprise security practices in setting up the administrative credentials. As the primary security officer, I was registered as the master license administrator with Authguard Solutions. This was not unusual in enterprise software deployments. Someone needed to be the designated point of contact and administrator. What made this situation unique was the specific verification protocol that Authguard required for security compliance. Every 6 months, the system would initiate an automated verification process that required the registered administrator to complete a multi-factor authentication sequence. This was not simply a matter of entering a password. It involved biometric verification tied specifically to my credentials. If the verification failed, the system would enter a 72-hour grace period, during which normal operations would continue, but with warning notifications. If the verification remained incomplete after 72 hours, the security protocols would begin restricting access to protected systems, gradually escalating until a complete authentication lockout occurred. All of this was clearly documented in the implementation guidelines and system administration manuals that I had provided to the executive team and IT department. I had conducted training sessions, created detailed process documents, and sent regular reminders about upcoming verification requirements. The most recent reminder had been the email I sent 2 weeks ago, the one that received no response. The verification was scheduled for 9 a.m. tomorrow morning. As I contemplated this situation, my phone began buzzing with more messages. Justin, Andrea from marketing, even Harold, all reaching out to express shock at my departure and ask what had happened. I responded briefly to Harold, promising to call him later in the week, but otherwise let the messages accumulate unanswered. I needed time to think, to decide what kind of person I wanted to be in this situation. The easy path, and the ethically questionable one, would be to do nothing. To let the verification fail, watch the system gradual lockdown occur, and enjoy the chaos from afar as the company scrambled to understand what was happening. Given Bradley's dismissal of my expertise and warnings, it seemed unlikely that anyone had made contingency plans for the verification process. The professional path would be to proactively contact someone at TechVault, perhaps Iris or the IT help desk, and explain the situation, providing detailed instructions on how to contact Authguard and request an emergency administrator change. This would prevent any disruption to the company's operations and protect the client data I had always prioritized. As I weighed these options, my anger at Bradley's smug dismissal warred with my professional integrity and concern for colleagues who would be caught in the crossfire of any system failure. Ultimately, I decided on a middle path. I would not proactively reach out, but I would answer honestly if contacted. I would not sabotage the system intentionally, but neither would I go out of my way to prevent a problem that proper attention to my warnings would have avoided. Having made this decision, I turned off my phone, opened another bottle of wine, and spent the evening alternatively crying and laughing at the absurdity of the situation. Eventually, I fell into an exhausted sleep on my couch, emotionally drained, but strangely at peace. with whatever would unfold the next day. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I had forgotten to close, and the insistent ringing of my doorbell. Disoriented, and still wearing yesterday's clothes, I stumbled to the door to find a delivery person with a sympathy bouquet from Iris. The card read simply, "Their loss. Call me when you are ready." The gesture brought fresh tears to my eyes as I placed the flowers in water and made coffee. Checking the time, I realized it was 8:45 a.m. In 15 minutes, the Authguard verification protocol would activate, sending its first authentication request to credentials that no longer existed. I showered and dressed, trying to focus on practical next steps. I needed to update my resume, contact my professional network, begin the process of finding a new position. I had savings to cover several months of expenses, so there was no immediate financial pressure. Still, the rhythm of these familiar tasks helped restore a sense of normalcy to a situation that still felt surreal. At 9:30 a.m., my phone began ringing. The TechVault IT help desk number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. At 9:45, Ethan called, then Bradley, then a number I did not recognize. I silenced the phone and continued working on my resume. By 10:30, my email inbox was filling with increasingly urgent messages. The subject lines told the story. Urgent, authentication system, issue system access problems, throughout network, emergency assistance needed Authguard. At 11 a.m., a text message from Iris broke through. My self-imposed isolation, complete system meltdown happening, Authguard verification failing. No one knows what to do. Bradley blaming you. CEO involved now. What is happening? I finally picked up my phone and called her back. Audrey, thank God, Iris answered immediately. It is absolute chaos here. The authentication system started throwing errors at 9 this morning, and now half the department cannot access their systems. Bradley is having a complete meltdown, screaming about sabotage and threatening legal action against you. What exactly is happening with the system? I asked, keeping my voice neutral. Error messages about failed verification protocols. Something about the master license administrator credentials being invalid. Ethan has been on the phone with Authguard for over an hour, but they refused to make any changes without authorization from the registered administrator. She paused. Which is apparently you. Yes, I confirmed. As I documented in the implementation guidelines and reminded everyone in my email 2 weeks ago, the system requires biannual verification from the registered administrator. Oh God, Iris groaned. No one paid any attention to that email. Bradley dismissed it as just another example of you being difficult about the transition. I said nothing, letting the implications sink in. Audrey, Iris said slowly. Did you know this would happen when they fired you yesterday? I was aware that the scheduled verification was due today, I replied carefully. I sent multiple notifications about it over the past month. All of them were ignored. Bradley is telling everyone you deliberately sabotaged the system, she said. But that is not what happened, is it? They just fired the only person who could complete the required verification. That would be an accurate assessment of the situation, I confirmed. Iris let out a laugh that bordered on hysterical. This is unbelievable. The entire company is grinding to a halt. Clients are calling about access issues, and the executive team is in emergency meetings trying to figure out what to do. As we spoke, my phone buzzed with another call. This one from Garrett Wilson, the CEO who had come in with the Nexus acquisition. I had met him only twice briefly at company-wide meetings. I should take this, I told Iris. The CEO is calling. Good luck, she said. And Audrey, for what it is worth, most of us think this whole situation is completely ridiculous. You deserved better. I ended the call with Iris and answered the CEO's call, curious about how this conversation would unfold. Miss Bennett Garrett's voice was tense but controlled. This is Garrett Wilson. We seem to have a situation with our authentication system that requires your assistance. I understand you are no longer with the company as of yesterday, but I am hoping you might be willing to help us resolve this urgent matter. His careful avoidance of any mention of my termination was telling. There would be no acknowledgement of the mistake, just a pragmatic attempt to solve the immediate crisis. I am aware of the verification protocol that would be running today, I replied, matching his professional tone. I sent several notifications about it over the past month. A brief silence followed. Yes, I have been made aware of those communications. There appears to have been an oversight in our transition process. The situation is now causing significant disruption to our operations and client services. We would like to engage you as a consultant to help resolve this immediately." A consultant, I repeated, a hint of irony in my voice. "And what would this consultation involve?" "We need you to complete the verification process with Authguard and transition the administrator credentials to our current security team. Authguard has indicated they cannot make any changes without your direct involvement. We are prepared to compensate you appropriately for your time." I considered my options. I could refuse outright forcing them to weather the full system lockdown that would occur over the next 72 hours. I could demand an exorbitant fee, taking advantage of their desperate situation. Or I could help resolve the problem professionally, maintaining my integrity while ensuring they understood exactly what their hasty decision had cost them. "I would be willing to assist," I said finally. "However, I would need to do this on site with direct access to the systems. And we would need to discuss terms that acknowledge the specialized nature of this consultation." Garrett's relief was audible. "Of course. When can you come in?" "I can be there in an hour," I said. "Please ensure that Bradley Pierce is available for this meeting as well. As my former supervisor, he should be part of this process." There was a slight hesitation before Garrett agreed. "He will be there. Thank you, Miss Bennett. We appreciate your professionalism in this matter." As I ended the call, I felt a strange mix of vindication and disappointment. The situation had validated my expertise and the importance of the systems I had built, but at the cost of a company crisis that affected many innocent colleagues. Still, as I gathered my things to return to the office I had left in Humiliation just yesterday, I could not help but feel a certain satisfaction. Sometimes the most effective revenge is simply allowing people to experience the natural consequences of their poor decisions. And Bradley Pierce was about to experience those consequences in full public view. The atmosphere at Tech Vault was noticeably different when I walked through the doors at 1 p.m. Gone was the usual buzz of productive activity, replaced by clusters of employees speaking in hushed, concerned tones. Heads turned as I passed, expressions ranging from relief to curiosity to outright vindication on the faces of those who had witnessed my departure the previous day. The security guard at the front desk, Manuel, who had always greeted me warmly each morning, looked distinctly uncomfortable as he processed my visitor badge. "Good to see you again, Audrey," he said quietly, sliding the temporary badge across the counter. "Things have been chaotic today." "So I have heard," I replied, clipping the badge to my blazer, a symbolic demotion from the permanent employee credential I had carried for 7 years. Garrett himself was waiting for me in the lobby, his typically composed executive demeanor showing cracks of stress around the eyes and mouth. He extended his hand in a formal greeting that felt oddly performative given the circumstances. "Thank you for coming in on such short notice," he said, leading me toward the executive conference room. "We have assembled the key stakeholders to address this situation efficiently." The key stakeholders turned out to be a crowded room of anxious faces. Bradley sat at the far end of the table, his expression thunderous. Ethan was beside him, looking significantly less confident than he had during our system reviews. Stephanie from HR occupied a corner seat, notepad at the ready. Various IT staff and security team members filled the remaining chairs, including Iris, who gave me a subtle thumbs up from her position near the door. Most surprising was the presence of a video conference screen showing 2 representatives from Authguard Solutions, their corporate logo prominently displayed behind them. "Miss Bennett, thank you for joining us," the older of the 2 Authguard representatives began. "I am Daniel Montgomery, Chief Security Officer at Authguard. This is my colleague Sarah Johnson, our Client Authentication Specialist. We understand there is some confusion regarding the verification protocols for Tech Vault's master license." "No confusion on my part," I replied evenly, taking the seat that had been left open at the head of the table. "The biannual verification protocol is functioning exactly as designed and documented." Bradley leaned forward, barely containing his anger. "What is not functioning is our entire security infrastructure. Half our systems are throwing authentication errors, client portals are going offline, and we are facing potential service-level agreement violations with our largest customers. Perhaps we should start with a clear explanation of what is happening technically," Garrett suggested, shooting a warning glance at Bradley. "For those in the room who may not understand the authentication architecture." I nodded, shifting into the familiar role of technical educator, a role I had played countless times in this very room. The AuthGuard Solutions platform that protects TechVault's data and systems requires biannual verification from the Registered Master License Administrator. I began keeping my explanation clinical and factual. This is not a simple password verification. It involves a multi-factor authentication process tied to specific credentials. I gestured toward the AuthGuard representatives on the screen. This verification requirement is part of the compliance framework that allows AuthGuard to provide its security guarantees. It ensures that the system has not been compromised and that the proper oversight remains in place. And you are the only registered administrator, Garrett stated. Yes. As I documented in the Implementation Guidelines Administrator reports and verification reminder emails, I removed a tablet from my bag and opened a folder of documents. I have copies of all the relevant communications, including the most recent reminder sent 2 weeks ago, specifically highlighting the upcoming verification requirement. I displayed the email on the conference room screen, the date and recipient list clearly visible. Bradley, Ethan, and several executives were among those who had received and apparently ignored the warning. The verification process was scheduled for 9 a.m. today, I continued. When the system attempted to authenticate and could not reach my credentials, which were deactivated yesterday upon my termination, it initiated the standard security protocol for potentially compromised systems. Which is what exactly, Garrett asked, his eyes fixed on the email displayed on screen. A 72-hour grace period with escalating access restrictions, I explained. First, warning notifications, then gradual restriction of administrative functions. Finally, if verification remains incomplete after 72 hours, a complete system lockdown to protect client data from potential security breach. Daniel from AuthGuard nodded on the video screen. This is correct. These protocols are standard for our enterprise security packages, and were clearly outlined in the Master License Agreement TechVault signed 3 years ago. Bradley's face had transitioned from angry to something approaching alarmed. Why was there no redundancy, no backup administrator? This is a critical single point of failure. The question was directed at me, but Daniel answered first. Our system allows for multiple administrators, Mr. Pierce. According to our records, Ms. Bennett submitted a formal request to add 2 secondary administrators last year. That request required executive approval from TechVault, which was never provided despite 3 follow-up inquiries from our account management team. All eyes in the room turned to Bradley, whose complexion had taken on an interesting shade of red. I never received any such request, he insisted. Wordlessly, I brought up another document on the screen, a detailed project plan for security administration redundancy that I had submitted to Bradley 4 months ago. His dismissive response was included in the email thread. Current priorities do not allow for this project. Table for future consideration. Garrett closed his eyes briefly, visibly processing the implications. When he opened them, his gaze was steely. So, to summarize, we are experiencing a system-wide authentication failure because a scheduled verification could not be completed after we terminated the only authorized administrator, a verification that was documented and communicated multiple times but ignored. That is correct, I confirmed. This is sabotage, Bradley suddenly declared, slamming his hand on the table. She deliberately withheld critical information about this verification process, knowing it would cause system failure after her termination. The accusation hung in the air for a moment before I responded. I documented the verification requirements in multiple reports. I said, my voice remaining calm. I sent reminder emails to the entire security team. I specifically highlighted the upcoming verification deadline in my final email 2 weeks ago. All of this is timestamped and archived in the company's own systems. I turned to face Bradley directly. If you chose not to read those communications or dismiss them as unimportant, that reflects on your management practices, not on my professional conduct. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We were focused on the integration priorities. The existing authentication system was scheduled for replacement as part of the standardization process. Without understanding its role in the current security architecture, I noted, as I tried to explain in several meetings that I was eventually excluded from. Sarah from AuthGuard spoke up for the first time. Regardless of how this situation developed, we need to address the immediate issue. The verification protocol must be completed to prevent further system degradation. As the registered administrator, Miss Bennett is the only person who can initiate this process under current circumstances. All attention returned to me. The power dynamic in the room had shifted dramatically since yesterday's termination meeting. Now, I was not a disposable employee, but the key to resolving a crisis that was costing the company thousands of dollars every hour. I am willing to complete the verification process, I said, addressing Garrett rather than Bradley, and I can assist in transitioning the administrator role properly to ensure this situation does not recur. However, I would like to discuss the terms of this consultation first. Garrett nodded. Of course. Perhaps we should have that conversation privately. Bradley started to object, but Garrett silenced him with a sharp gesture. Bradley, please work with the Authguard team to prepare whatever technical access Miss Bennett will require. Stephanie, join us, please. As the room cleared, leaving only Garrett, Stephanie, and myself, I outlined my conditions: a consulting fee equal to 6 months of my former salary, removal of the non-compete clause from my severance agreement, and a letter of recommendation, acknowledging my expertise and contributions to the company. Stephanie looked pained at these requests, but Garrett did not hesitate. Agreed. We can have the revised paperwork ready within the hour. Now, how quickly can you resolve the authentication issue? Once I have proper system access, the verification process takes approximately 30 minutes, I replied. But there is a more important conversation we need to have about the future security architecture of TechVault. The current implementation plans will create significant vulnerabilities that could compromise client data. Garrett studied me for a moment, then nodded. I think we have established today that your technical assessments deserve more attention than they have been receiving. Let us resolve the immediate crisis, and then I would like to hear your concerns in detail. 3 hours later, the authentication system was fully restored. I had completed the verification protocol, documented the process for future administrators, and provided a comprehensive briefing on the Authguard system architecture to a much more attentive audience than I had enjoyed in recent months. Throughout this process, Bradley remained uncharacteristically quiet, his earlier bluster replaced by a grim recognition of his precarious position. When Ethan attempted to suggest a modified implementation plan, Bradley quickly deferred to my assessment, a remarkable reversal from his previous dismissal of my expertise. As the day concluded and the immediate crisis was resolved, Garrett asked me to stay for a final conversation in his office. The corner suite offered sweeping views of the city skyline, now bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. I owe you an apology, he began, surprising me with his directness. It is clear that your concerns about our integration approach were valid and should have been taken seriously. Today's situation was entirely preventable. I nodded, accepting the acknowledgement without comment. I would like to offer you a position, he continued. Not your old role, but something more appropriate to your expertise. We need someone to lead security architecture across the entire organization, reporting directly to me. The issues you have identified require leadership with both technical depth and a willingness to speak truth to power, qualities you have demonstrated conclusively. The offer was unexpected, and I had to admit tempting. The role he described would provide the influence and resources to properly implement the security infrastructure I had always envisioned. But the events of the past months had revealed fundamental issues with the company's culture and leadership that could not be erased by a single day of vindication. I appreciate the offer, I said carefully, but I think we both know that too much damage has been done. I would be returning to an environment where many in leadership have already formed their opinions about me, opinions that one day of crisis will not entirely change. Garrett did not seem surprised by my response. I understand, though I hope you will consider consulting with us during the transition period as we reshape our security approach. Your insights would be valuable even in a more limited capacity. I will consider it. I agreed, standing to signal the end of our conversation, but right now I think I need some distance to determine my next steps. As I walked through the office toward the exit, I passed Bradley's now empty office. Iris intercepted me before I reached the elevator. You were brilliant today, she said, giving me a quick hug. Bradley has been called to headquarters for meetings tomorrow. The rumor is he will not be returning. Companies have short memories, I replied, not entirely convinced his career would suffer long-term consequences. But today was satisfying, I admit. What will you do now, she asked. I smiled, feeling a lightness I had not experienced in months. Something new, something where my expertise is valued from day one, not just when disaster strikes. As the elevator doors closed, I caught a final glimpse of the office where I had spent 7 years of my life. There was sadness in that moment, but also a sense of possibility. Sometimes the end of one chapter is necessary for the beginning of a better one. And sometimes the most powerful lesson you can teach is simply to walk away and let the consequences speak for themselves. 6 months passed more quickly than I expected. The consulting agreement I eventually negotiated with TechVault kept me connected to the company through their security transition, but on my terms, 3 days a month working remotely with clearly defined deliverables and boundaries. Bradley never returned from his meetings at headquarters. According to Iris, who still sent me regular updates, he was reassigned to a special project, the corporate equivalent of being sent to Siberia. Ethan remained but was demoted to a standard analyst role under new leadership. The Oathguard incident had exposed not just a technical failure but a cultural one, forcing Garrett to reevaluate the entire integration approach. On a personal level, the experience forced me to confront some uncomfortable truths about my own professional choices. For years, I had prioritized the technical aspects of my work, building robust systems, solving complex problems, creating elegant solutions. But I had neglected the equally important political and interpersonal dimensions of corporate life. I had assumed that excellent work would speak for itself, that expertise would be recognized and valued on its merits alone. The reality of modern corporate environments is far more complicated, where perception often matters as much as performance, and where building the right alliances can be as critical as building the right systems. My first month after leaving TechVault was a period of reflection and recovery. I declined several immediate job offers, giving myself permission to process the experience fully before jumping into another corporate environment. I traveled briefly visiting my sister in Colorado and hiking in the mountains where the perspective of natural grandeur helped shrink my professional setback to a more manageable size. When I returned, I began meeting with former colleagues and industry contacts, sharing my story honestly but without bitterness. These conversations revealed something surprising. Many experienced professionals had similar stories of corporate politics, overwhelming technical merit of expertise being dismissed in favor of hierarchy, of the challenges faced particularly by women in technical leadership roles. 3 months after the Oathguard incident, I received an unexpected message from Harold TechVault's original founder. He had started a new venture, focused on security solutions for mid-sized businesses, and wanted to discuss a potential role. Our lunch meeting extended into dinner as we shared stories and visions for building not just effective technical systems but healthy organizational cultures. What happened at TechVault after the acquisition was heartbreaking, Harold admitted over coffee and dessert. The company we built valued expertise and collaboration. Watching that culture be dismantled taught me that technical excellence alone is not enough. You have to actively protect the human systems that make the technical ones possible. His new company, Sentinel Systems, offered me a leadership role that combined technical architecture with organizational development, a chance to shape both the products and the culture from the ground up. The position came with equity, autonomy, and explicit recognition of the lessons we had both learned from the TechVault experience. I accepted the offer and found myself energized by the challenge of building something new with a team that shared my values. We established clear documentation practices, overlapping areas of expertise to prevent single points of failure, and regular knowledge-sharing sessions to ensure critical systems were understood by multiple team members. More importantly, we created a culture that valued constructive dissent, that encouraged raising concerns and questioning approaches, regardless of hierarchy. Technical decisions were made based on merit rather than status, with even the newest team members empowered to challenge ideas if they had valid concerns. 6 months into this new role, I received an email from Garrett at TechVault. The integration had been completed, but not as originally planned. Many of the custom systems my team had built had been retained rather than replaced, now properly documented and supported by a more diverse team of administrators. The Oathguard implementation had become a case study within Nexus on the importance of respecting existing expertise during acquisitions. Your departure was costly for us in more ways than one, Garrett wrote, but the lessons have made us a better organization. I thought you might appreciate knowing that. I did appreciate it, though I had no regrets about my decision to leave. My new role at Sentinel offered challenges and opportunities that would not have been possible had I stayed, even in the improved version of TechVault that emerged from the crisis. The experience with Bradley, and the subsequent vindication, taught me valuable lessons about professional self-advocacy. Documentation had saved me not just technically, but professionally, creating an irrefutable record of my warnings and contributions. I had learned to be more strategic about communication, ensuring critical information reached multiple stakeholders, rather than relying on a single point of contact who might filter or dismiss it. Most importantly, I learned that walking away from a toxic situation is not failure, but sometimes the most powerful choice you can make. By refusing to fight on their terms, by simply allowing the natural consequences of poor decisions to unfold, I had created the space for something better in my own career, while catalyzing necessary change in the organization I left behind. The relationships with colleagues presented another opportunity for growth. Some, like Iris, had stood by me but felt powerless to intervene. Others had remained silent during my marginalization, afraid for their own positions. I chose to forgive rather than harbor resentment, recognizing that organizational dynamics create complex pressures that can make courage difficult. At Sentinel, we deliberately built a team culture that made supporting colleagues the expected norm rather than a risky exception. We celebrated those who raised concerns or defended others' contributions, creating psychological safety that enabled true collaboration. As I reflect on the journey from humiliation to vindication to new beginnings, the most valuable insight is, perhaps the simplest: know your worth, document your work, and be willing to walk away from environments that do not value what you bring to the table. Technical skills can be powerful, but self-respect is irreplaceable. The master license incident might seem like perfect revenge in a corporate drama, but it was actually something more profound: the natural consequence of dismissing expertise and failing to listen to those closest to the systems that power our digital world. The most satisfying aspect was not Bradley's downfall, but the opportunity it created for genuine growth, both for me personally and for an organization that needed to relearn the value of respecting technical merit over hierarchy. Whatever challenges you might be facing in your own career, remember that your expertise has value beyond any single employer's recognition. Sometimes the most powerful statement you can make is to simply place your badge and laptop on the desk, walk away with your dignity intact, and trust that your worth will become evident in your absence. Have you ever been in a situation where your expertise was dismissed until it became crucial? How did you handle it? Let me know in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with others who might be struggling with similar workplace challenges. Remember that sometimes what feels like an ending is actually the beginning of something much better. Thank you for listening to my story, and I wish you the courage to stand firm in your value wherever your career takes you.